Our special series on drugs takes us now to the streets. The police chiefs of Houston and Minneapolis are with us. So is the narcotics chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. They will first watch, along with the rest of us, a report on Operation Pressure Point, a police versus the pushers battle on New York City's Lower East Side. The reporter is correspondent June Cross.
It's 5 p.m., evening rush hour in the heart of New York's Lower East Side. Prime time for drug dealers. They're most likely selling heroin or cocaine. They'll disappear just long enough for police cars to pass. To some observers, the openness of their trade may seem shocking, but those who live and work here say it used to be even worse.
Used to be every corner you could buy drugs, literally. Some apartments were set up as shooting galleries for the junkies. In other words, this was their private spot to come and take off.
We had people using the seclusion of the church to shoot up. It was like wall-to-wall drugs on the sidewalk, drugs on the street. You just had to almost go into the middle of the street to walk through a large part of the neighborhood. It was very frightening. It was noise, constant hawking of drugs day and night, 24 hours, with maybe 3 or 4 different operations on each of the corners vying for the trade.
The Lower East Side has long had a reputation as New York's drug supermarket. It's a crossroads of races, nationalities, and lifestyles. It's chock full of abandoned houses ideal for surreptitious business, for addicts trying to escape the eyes of the law. But escaping the law has become more difficult since Operation Pressure Point began. 2 years ago, New York City police doubled their manpower in the Lower East Side. The goal, to take back the streets from the drug dealers. Buyers faced 2 months in jail. Dealers were rounded up in weekly drug raids, and the streets took on a noticeably different character. The man who ran Operation Pressure Point then was Pat Carroll, now a police captain.
It was like securing ground in a battle. We'd send our undercover officers in to make narcotic buys and so, and after they had finished, then we'd flood the area with uniformed patrol. You'd take an area and you'd hold that ground. And we did that block by block in the Pressure Point target area. And slowly but surely, we gained control of the streets that way.
This man is a secret agent in the battle of dealers versus cops. He's an undercover detective.
I've been involved in over 1,500, 2,000 investigations involving, drug dealers. And I make sure that, I'm there and that this person that has been arrested for selling me drugs gets convicted.
He works with a team that videotapes his deals from a surveillance van. They let us ride with them on the condition that they remain anonymous. Undercover cops can spend up to 16 hours a day in a surveillance van like this one. The idea is to gather evidence for a conviction. But the reality is that most dealers have backup teams that take to the streets the minute police make an arrest. We went back to this location a few days later to do some surveillance of our own, and we watched the cat and mouse game police and dealers play.
Most of the dealers, they split into groups. If you have an operation that's being run by a group of people, they usually have managers, they have runners, they have steerers, they have lookouts, and it's like a little business out in the streets where their lunch breaks, their shifts, they get paid by the day. And their steerers and their lookouts are basically the ones that are used to signal the ones that are actually doing the selling when the cops are coming.
A high-pitched whistle is the warning that police are on the scene. Seconds afterwards, a street that was bustling with people looks as deserted as downtown after hours. The police make sure it stays that way by deploying what they call narcotic suppression teams. Their numbers are so great that at times the Lower East Side looks like occupied territory. The police are trying to hold turf that's belonged to drug dealers for decades, an area dealers from out of state come to for supplies. Captain Carroll explains.
The location of the Lower East Side off the parkways and close to Jersey, Brooklyn, the other boroughs, the tenements. All these put together probably lent the area into an ideal location to sell and buy drugs.
There's another factor that makes the Lower East Side ideal for drug trade. It comes with a ready-made labor force. The average family income here is just $6,500 a year. Legal jobs are scarce, and dealing drugs pays better anyway. Tony Ruiz found out just how well it paid when he was 15.
I was trying to work legal. It was very hard. Making 150 a week wasn't making it. So then my friend talked to me about making some real money. So I got involved with him, and things got better. Next thing you know, I was making 500 a week with him. So I got more involved with him. So next thing you know, I started dealing big way with him. I was about 16, 17 at the time. So next thing you know, I was making about 1,000 a week. That was the highest I ever made, about 1,000 a week.
Ruiz says a well-run business could gross up to $40,000 a week on street drug sales alone. Then came Operation Pressure Point. Ruiz got out of the drug business, but a lot of other dealers just relocated.
Went all like to Bronx, went to Brooklyn, Waldtown, Harlem, Spanish Harlem.
So it's just moved around
Yeah.
to other places. The police call Operation Pressure Point a success. They say it's removed 90% of the drug trafficking from these Lower East Side streets. The truth is, the police have just made it more difficult for the dealers to sell and drug users to buy. There are abandoned buildings and storefront shops not far from here where drug trafficking goes on in broad daylight. And what's more, those who live here tell us that although the drug traffic may have disappeared from the streets, it is flourishing inside the elevators, stairwells, and apartments of these city-owned housing projects.
You don't see the drug problems inside the buildings, and right now that's really very severe. I myself have had a lousy night. I haven't slept very much. I had a bad time last night in my building because of the door slammings, the going in and out, the business operating all around.
We had a system of what we call vertical patrols, where police officers would go into buildings and walk the top floor down and looking for signs of people using drugs. It's good to have the vertical patrols, but if every officer now starts going into buildings, then they're not as visible and things start to happen on the street. We start to lose that control we had.
Anis Sandoval lives in the public housing projects that are supposed to be included in Operation Pressure Point. Yet she and her neighbors pointed out streets where they dared not walk at certain hours, telephones where drug runners made deals in plain sight of uniformed police.
I've seen the police commissioner on television talking about this Operation Pressure Point and how successful it has been and how it has given the streets back to the people. It makes me laugh. Where you may have had lines of people waiting in the streets at one point, you do get to see this inside buildings, people waiting out in the hall, for their drugs. You see it out there in the street.
The sergeant who assigns officers to this area said it is possible for dealers to operate in the open because the dealers are flexible and his officers rookies.
The majority of the foot personnel here are young police officers just out of the academy, and this is their really first street experience. This is really their first taste of law enforcement.
Sergeant Coffey says the only way to eliminate drugs from the projects is for neighbors to come forward and identify the dealers. But Anis Sandoval says that's a hard thing to do.
You will see the little posters everywhere, tips called tips anonymously. But from the community's point of view, a lot of community people are involved, families, kids, And, of course, people are going to hesitate to turn in their own, so to speak. So I think it has to be a totally different approach.
The approach Ms. Sandoval and other Lower East Side residents favor is homesteading, reclaiming the abandoned buildings that serve as a haven for the illicit drug business and turning them into low-cost housing.
Before we started homesteading, the building was a shooting gallery for junkies. Drugs were being manufactured there and cut and sold from the building. The Homestead program has helped a great deal more than Operation Pressure Point in eliminating drugs from the Lower East Side.
The homesteading program is a very slow program. It takes an awful lot of time to get the building squared away, and I don't see that as an immediate solution. Our main concern was to get the drug dealers and the narcotics out of the area. We're not naive to think that it's going to disappear overnight. It's going to take a lot more work and a lot more effort, but the main thing is we have it under control.
The city is reclaiming the streets of the Lower East Side. Now, city officials must convince those who live here that it's serious about improving their quality of life. For the conditions that make the Lower East Side a drug haven still exist. And until those conditions change, the best the police can do is chase the drug trade block by block.
That report from New York City by correspondent June Cross. New York police said Operation Pressure Point led to the arrest of 38 people just last week. Those arrested were alleged to be distributing 1/6 of the heroin sold in the United States each year. Now we go to Los Angeles, to Glenn Levant, commander of narcotics investigation for the Los Angeles Police Department, to Houston and Lee Brown, chief of the Houston Police Department, and to Minneapolis Police Chief Tony Boza, formerly a top official of the New York Police Department. Chief Boza, to you first. What do you think of this pressure point approach?
Well, I don't think anybody believes in it. I think it's kind of a joke. Who are they kidding? It's the old, they're playing a shell game with the people, pushing the thing around from one place to another. The nation is awash in drugs. We're losing everywhere. And to hear a police officials talk about taking control of the problem is a real absurdity. I think it would be more befitting a humor show than one dealing in reality. On one hand, we have a tremendous supply. The prices are not going up. The pushers are being displaced and moved about. We have a huge demand, and as long as there's going to be a demand, somebody's going to come in with a supply. The reality is that the seizures are getting bigger and bigger. We are awash in drugs, awash in alcohol. Nobody wants to talk about the real problems relating to poverty, joblessness, illiteracy, unemployment, single-parent families. That's all too boring. Everybody wants to go out there with a flamethrower, and they're just chasing their tails. To me, it's an absurdity. It's a joke. We're losing the war on drugs, and the President of the United States sends the Vice President to Miami and with the panoply of the whole government and the Army and everything else, and I think he has beaten back in retreat. So let's not kid each other. We're losing that war.
You agree, Chief Brown in Houston?
Well, our problem is not of the magnitude as just displayed in New York, but we certainly have a problem in our city like any other city. One of the things that we see happening is that the pressure that's put on in South Florida, for example, results in an increase in drug traffic in our city. We have many of the same characteristics in Texas as exist in South Florida. We're a long coastline, border state, transportation center. So we are seeing an increase in drugs coming into our city. I believe that there are some things that we can do. I don't believe that we've done all that we can to address the problem. It would be my sense that if this country had pointed at it from other countries' warheads, we would take direct action and use all the resources at our disposal to address the problem. I don't see that happening. I think we have to use all the resources at our disposal to address the drug problem.
What about Houston? Excuse me, I was just going to, excuse me, go ahead.
In Houston, we see marijuana being the biggest problem, and we say that based on the number of arrests that we make, followed by cocaine and then some of your speed, and heroin still exists. It's not what it used to be, but it still is around. What we're doing here is looking at, in fact, just recently we developed a task force to look at the problem, to look at the nature and extent, so we can develop strategies to address it with the resources that we have, recognizing that our resources certainly are not sufficient to address what exists in this country to be about $110 billion a year industry. It's a lot of money in drugs. People are not going to stop. They're going to move when the pressure comes. So it is something we have to be very much concerned about. I might also point out that although we talk about from the police perspective, law enforcement, we also have to be concerned about education. The reason drugs flourish in our country is because people are purchasing it. There's a demand for it. So we have to also deal with those young children who are ruining their lives. You can't think you can't learn in school if you're high. We have to be concerned about that as well.
Commander Levant in Los Angeles, do you agree with Chief Boza that it's all a joke to do what they're doing in New York through the pressure point approach?
What they're doing in New York is very valuable as one part of the problem. You have to keep pressure on drug sellers on the street level. But the problem with narcotics in this country is really an epidemic, and there's no one simplistic solution to the cure of the epidemic. One of the things that we've adopted in Los Angeles to deal with it is we have what we call a total spectrum approach to the narcotics epidemic here. And this deals with everything from the interdiction of major traffickers of heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and so forth to prevent it from coming into Los Angeles, down to working on street-level people, down to a program that we call our DARE program. It's Drug Abuse Resistance Education. And this is the long-range solution to the narcotic epidemic. This is a program in cooperation with the school district and the police department where we actually teach children in the 5th and 6th grades how to say no to the peer pressure and to resist becoming involved in that first step with narcotics. And we've had this since 1983, and it's been very successful.
But from a police standpoint, are you really in control of the situation in Los Angeles?
We believe we're as much in control of the situation in Los Angeles as any place in the world, in the free world.
Yeah, but that wasn't the question. Do you feel that you're in control, not compared with anybody else, just from your own perspective, looking just at what the problem is vis-a-vis what you're able to do?
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about control or lack of control is really immaterial. We have what we believe in Los Angeles to be a real good approach to the narcotic problem. And we believe that we're stopping about maybe 15% of it from getting into the city, and we're keeping constant pressure on people that are at all levels of the trafficking. There is a lot of demand for narcotics, certainly. And it's the appetite, the public's appetite for narcotics that is making this thing an epidemic. Without a market, people aren't going to smuggle it into the country and risk these long jail sentences for bringing it in, being in possession of it and using it.
Now back to you, Chief Boza, in Minneapolis. Minneapolis does not have that serious a drug problem, correct?
Yes, that is true. The Protestant ethic, the old American values, the basic values of the agrarian values are alive and well here. So we are not awash in drugs, but that has nothing to do with law enforcement. I'm tempted, if you had to go out and capture a rapidly flowing supply of anything into the marketplace, I don't think that you would go around looking at the individual purchaser of one pill. I think you would be thinking about where it gets grown and where it gets imported and who is distributing it and wholesaling it. One approach that law enforcement might take is the task force approach, combining with the Drug Enforcement Agency, because to attempt to attack it on a municipal level is silly. The educational program will bring some incremental help. But what happens in the upper Midwest is that we are here, a tight little island surrounded by a vast prairie where the old American values are still alive and well. And it's almost like stepping into a time machine and emerging in a country that is 70 years younger. The basic values are alive and well, a kind of Shangri-La. So it is different, but we do have drugs, and I do believe that the enormous seizures that we are seeing, tremendous tons and tons of marijuana from Mexico, huge a ton of cocaine, presumably from Colombia. This is unbelievable. The prices, we make these enormous seizures, the prices are not affected, which suggests to me that the supply is there. We have an enormous demand. This is a very druggy culture. People talk about the recreational use of drugs. The fact that heroin is no longer as popular as it used to be is because it enslaves and it kills you. So everybody is looking for a drug that makes you feel good without exacting some horrifying toll. But the Midwest is different, and so far it has held together. But I am persuaded that the things that are eating at New York and Miami and Los Angeles and Cleveland and Detroit and Chicago are going to wind up eating at Minneapolis as well sooner or later. And that's very sad. And we're all doing a lot of things. And I'm not here to tell you that the cops aren't working. They're working. They are in New York and Los Angeles and Minneapolis, and we're educating. We have got programs going. But we're shoveling sand against an overwhelming tide. And I think that the real lesson came when when President Reagan, with all of the armed forces and the whole panoply and majesty and power and treasury of the United States government, sent Vice President Bush to Miami to take on the drug problem a couple of years ago. Is anybody prepared to say that we won that battle? I mean, we are kidding ourselves. Yeah. We're losing it. It's an epidemic. It's an educational problem. But it's also a problem of demand. We have a huge demand out there, and we've got to address it. It has to do with values. Why are blacks and Hispanics taking drugs to the degree that you saw on your screen? Because they're trying to escape from the conditions, the appalling conditions of their lives: illiteracy, unemployment, alcoholism, welfare. All of that is part of it. And unless we begin to attack the social and economic problems underlying this whole issue, because we're just chasing the symptoms, we're not going to come to grips with the question. And to me, the best hope of that is a national debate on the Catholic bishop's forthcoming letter on social justice. We've got to begin to think in those terms. I know I sound like an idiot, but I really believe it.
Well, let's go to Chief Brown in Houston. Do you see the drug problem the way Chief Boza does, that it's more of a values question than it is a police question?
There's really no one answer to the problem. We're going to have to deal with law enforcement because it is a serious problem. It's illegal to begin with. That's part of our responsibility. I don't believe that any municipality can successfully deal with the problem. We have to deal with it from the federal government through the state and local government. I believe that we have to constantly be aware of the fact that young people are using it. Their lives are being ruined, so we have to deal with it from the educational standpoint. We have to also deal with it from the treatment standpoint to address, as Chief Boza points out, the causes that lead one to get involved in the use of illegal drugs to begin with. What is happening in a large segment of our society, certain drugs are becoming acceptable. Use of marijuana, use of cocaine, those are socially acceptable drugs. Increasingly we find the synthetic drugs being developed through the lab, speed, etc. It's turned out to be a major problem, an increasing problem in our city, the ecstasy drugs or disco drugs.
Where does that put the police, the average policeman then, in trying to enforce laws against those if they've become acceptable?
Well, I think that we believe that it's wrong, it's illegal, and we're going to use the resources we have to enforce the law. In our city, we're dealing with neighborhood policing, trying to look at the problems on a neighborhood basis and then deliver our services around the unique problems of the neighborhood. That translates, as far as drug enforcement is concerned, that we give the street enforcement responsibility to our patrol force and direct our narcotics division to the wholesalers and to special areas.
Let me ask. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
But it is a problem that we can't say that a city can address the problem solely by itself. We have to look at what the federal government has to do to use all the resources at its disposal. We have to look at the problems that cause the use of drugs, and we have to look at education and treatment. We have to take a total look at the problem.
Commander Levant, are you as pessimistic about solving this problem as Chief Boza is?
Well, I remain kind of optimistic, I suppose, but I don't see a short-range solution to the problem. I see the narcotics solution perhaps as long as 15 years away in being solved. And the real solution to a social program, and it is a social problem, is in long-range public education to make the use of narcotics unattractive to people, such as has been so successful in the anti-smoking campaigns. As an example, I'm sure you're aware of the recent cover stories on both Time and Newsweek about drugs in the workplace this past March. It wasn't that long ago that the problem of drugs in the workplace would never have been even acknowledged by industry. And I think that once America takes on a problem as epidemic as narcotics, and it's addressed at the presidential level, at the state level, and the local level, that together as a country we can solve this social epidemic.
All right, Commander Levant in Los Angeles, Chief Brown in Houston, and Chief Boza in Minneapolis, thank you all very much.